Today we have our first snow day here, so welcome especially to all those who defied the cold weather. As Marina said, we are going to explore the study as a discipline to develop the spiritual life. I talked about study as a form of yoga in the previous session of Living Theosophy, which is available on the internet. So I'm not going to repeat what I said there. Basically, I tried to talk about what is needed, the attitude that we need to be able to learn from books, from our study through books, the development of a learning mind, and the ability to read without reacting to what we are reading, and then the need to ponder over what we read and not simply accepting things. But the point of view that I want to share with you tonight is wider, is not only based on the study of books, but study as a general attitude, which of course includes the study of books, but it includes also some other things. We are seeing that service, study, and meditation are three disciplines or practices that conform the spiritual life. It's a way of putting these things in order to talk about them. You know, we could mention probably different words or different practices. The spiritual life is something that is, at least from the theosophical point of view, all-encompassing. So when we talk about study, service, meditation, we are using these words to describe one single attitude that is needed. And you will see that many things are, sometimes we are talking about study and that could be part of meditation, or the way we have to do it is with the same attitude as we were describing last meeting about service. We are going to see that tonight. So let us not get too limited by the words, but it's a nice model to follow, study, meditation, and service. So first of all, let us spend a little time about study and the learning from books. Some people come to the TS and they want to learn a technique, a spiritual technique. They want to know what they can do. So they ask, what technique do you teach about meditation or this or that? But from the theosophical point of view, more important than action is perception. Before we start doing, we have to have certain clarity about what we have to do, how we have to do it. Before studying walking, we have to know where we want to go. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how fast we walk or run. If we are not going in the right direction, that is not leading us or to what the place where we want to get to. And many times we don't even know where we want to get to. So the first stage, before really studying, trying to do something, is to discover where should we go, where do I want to go, and how should I proceed on this path. So study is a first approach to these questions. We can answer these questions from many points of view. Usually the ones that we learn in our culture are focused on physical survival and physical success and success at the level of our life and finances and position, fame. So people, when they think about being happy, they think that they need, or we usually think that we need to have things, to have a position, to be admired, things like that. Now, that may not be true, and we may discover that even if we get to get those things, we are still unhappy. So the first question that we should question is, what is it really that I'm looking for? And how is it really going to crystallize in my life, to manifest in my life? So when we study any serious spiritual tradition, we will see all these points addressed. And as we said just a few moments ago, it's not very useful simply to incorporate certain viewpoint. For example, I read happiness comes from an inner state that is not related to the external world. Well, I may accept that and repeat it, but if there is not a real comprehension, one part of my mind is going to repeat that, while the whole of my being is going to still long for material or external things. So when we read, we have to take the things that we read as hypotheses. And then we have to try to see what it really means. And we have to see if we really accept that, if we really see the truth there. And be honest and say, well, it sounds very nice, but I don't see how this can produce happiness, for example. And let us investigate. Let us think about that. Talk with other people. So the attitude of study to learn is more than merely reading and memorizing concepts. And that's the idea of the comparative study also, that in the TS we try to encourage. Because when we study a particular philosophy, usually every philosophy is very consistent in itself. So every philosophy will explain the world in a particular way, and it's easy to learn that way and just repeat it. But when we contrast different philosophies and we see different ways that they explain reality, then that may help to question ourselves, to see things from different perspectives, and to see how we see things. Of course, there are some philosophies or schools of thought that are not necessarily wise or true or, in the right direction from a spiritual point of view. So it's not that everything we read, we may find some wisdom. But still, we need to read different things and recognize where we think that the approach is wrong. That's all part of our learning. So the first idea of this practice of study is that we may develop the right perspective of life. And with right perspective, I mean something relative, because that right perspective probably will evolve, will change, will mature. So we don't have to get too attached to a particular view of life, to a particular explanation of life. Because every view, every explanation, as we discussed in the previous series, is limited. There is no way we can describe truth through words. We can approach truth, but the perception of truth is more encompassing than simply the communication of truth by words. So we don't have to stick to any particular view, but for the time being, that's our view. And if we are earnest and sincere, and we try to live according to this view, we will understand this in a deep way, and also we will see what things really don't work, what things either we are not understanding or are not really describing reality in a good way, at least according to how we feel and how we perceive reality. So the study will produce a different perspective of life, of ourselves, so that we can discover what direction we should go and how we should walk, how we should tread the spiritual path. Because, for example, something that we said in our last talk, is that the motivation why you do things is very important for the spiritual life. At least from a theosophical point of view, it is. So if you approach with a selfish intent the spiritual life, probably you are not going to get the results that you expect. So not only the direction, but also how to walk is important. The study also is a way to develop a subtle perception in ourselves, because our minds are used to be focused on material things, on how to deal with life and our physical survival, or even our psychological survival. And the fact that we have to feed ourselves and people who are around that depend on us, and the fact that we have to survive is a force, or produces a force that tends to focus our minds on concrete things. But this mind, or this aspect of our mind that perceives only the concrete things, is not usually able to see the large picture, to see beyond what appears to be. We need a subtler kind of mind to be able to perceive the subtler aspect of life. So when we study, we start, if we do it in the right way, we start developing this subtler mind. And even if we are studying things that are abstract, and some people say, what's the use of studying this that has nothing to do with my life? If we are really trying to comprehend things that are of a universal importance, we are developing this perception, this subtler mind, which is going to be useful in everything that I do in my life. I'm developing it's like going to a gym. The very fact of lifting the weight is not useful in itself. What is useful is what I develop to be used in a sport, for example, that we may be playing. So the study of universal things, of abstract and non-personal subjects, develop a kind of perception, a kind of mind that will be useful in everything that we do later. So this is another aspect that the study of books produces in ourselves. Now, study, as I said, is more than reading books. Many of us have the ability to learn from books, but don't necessarily have the ability to learn from life, from ourselves, or from other people. When I'm with a book, I'm not being really challenged. But then when I am with people, I am being challenged. And I may see things that I don't like. There is a story of Nasruddin, which he was a wise, mad person that is very famous in the Sufi stories. And his wife said, how come that you are so interested in truth in general, but you are not interested in the truth that you are not treating me well? You know, and that happens many times with ourselves. We say that we are seekers of truth, but then we are not able to see what is true in a situation, in a daily situation. We excuse ourselves, we blame others. And our instruments to perceive truth is the same whether we are trying to perceive the ultimate truth or universal truths, or if we are trying to perceive truth in our daily life. We perceive through our minds. And if in our daily life we are not able to face things as they are, then that mind is not being developed to perceive also universal truths. You know, the tendency that we create to reshape reality will affect also our meditation, our study of more abstract things, because it's the same mind. So we have to, if we are really willing to learn, to discover truth, we have to be willing to discover truth in our daily life also. So we have to be able not to learn not only from books, but from somebody else. Many times we don't like somebody else telling us something that is true, or what to do, or even in very little things. Some people, they have a very hard time to learn from another person, even mathematics, for example, because they feel that if they are learning, it means that they are below the other person. So there is this sense of pride or lack of self-confidence that don't allow this person to be in a position of learning. So it is important to see all these things, start learning about ourselves. So learn from books, but learn also from yourself. That requires to pay attention to ourselves. We learn from a book by paying attention, close attention to what the author says. In the same way, we can learn from ourselves by paying attention to our inner world, so that we can little by little learn how we react to things. We all have reactions, and we should know, I react to this point of view, I react to this attitude, I react to, or I like this, I tend to be more happier with this kind of situation, with this attitude. We should know ourselves, because actually these things that we discover are not our real being, are not ourselves in a real sense. They are the instruments that we as pure consciousness are using to relate to the world. So if we don't learn about this, then we cannot live in the right way. It's like you can drive a car in the proper way if you learn about the car and how things work and what you do or should do and what you shouldn't. So paying attention to ourselves and our reactions is something that is essential in this attitude of study, in this discipline, let's say, of study. Then also we should try to learn about ourselves by questioning why we do things. But do all this in a spirit of discovery, like if you were a scientist. This is our own lab. Maybe it doesn't appeal to you, the idea of a scientist. It does to me because I'm a scientist. But in whatever way, try to see yourself as the ground of learning. So you may question yourself when you want to do something. Why do I want to do this? Just for the fun of it. Not to repress, not to condemn, to learn, to begin to see. If you condemn something in yourself too fast, then it is harder to perceive it. In psychology, there is all this theory that when we see something that we don't like, we tend to repress it and to send it back to the unconscious aspect of our mind. So condemning what we see is not the way to really learn about ourselves. But again, if we had got some understanding through the study of books about what we really are, we may be able to see ourselves with more equanimity, because we learned through this study that we are not really this body, these emotions, this mind. So we are seeing ourselves, we allow to see ourselves in a different way. That's why it is important to study also from books. But then it has to be brought to our own perception, our own discovery of reality. So when we know that our emotional body, our mental body, our physical body, they all have their own needs. And every one of us is working through a set of vehicles, let's say, as in Theosophy they are called, vehicles of consciousness, that have their own tendencies, then you may not be so identified with these vehicles of consciousness. And not being so identified, you have more freedom to see what is going on there. So this aspect of learning about yourself is very important. Now, for example, the voice of the silence says that self-knowledge is the result of good deeds. And we were talking before this talk with a friend about this phrase. And the idea, I think, is that we can learn about ourselves if we look ourselves with certain impersonality, not with egocentrism. And through kind deeds, through good actions, out of love, as we said in the last talk, we are developing this impersonality. So you can see how the background of self-knowledge from a theosophical point of view is again unselfishness. And let me read something about also the background of study through books, which you will see that is more or less the same. In the book At the Feet of the Master, this book was written by Krishnamurti when he was 14 years old, and it's supposed to be the words of his master, that was one of Blavatsky's teachers also. And he says, however wise you may be already, on this path you have much to learn. So much that here you need discrimination. And you must think carefully what is worth learning. All knowledge is useful, and one day you will have all knowledge. But while you have only a part, take care that it is the most useful part. Study then, but study first that which will most help you to help others. Work patiently at your studies, not that others may think you wise, not even that you may have the happiness of being wise, but because only the wise person can be wisely helpful. However much you wish to help, if you are ignorant, you may do more harm than good. So the idea is that, and I want to tie this with self-knowledge, the idea is that whatever we study, we should try to see that that is useful to help others. Again, this may be an artificial attitude if this sense of love is not gradually developing in our hearts. That's why we talk first about service, and because that is the background, and now we are talking about study, and then we will talk about meditation. But as we pay attention to this aspect, and we think about the real aim of study, of learning, of growing, we may acquire the right attitude for this. So, Krishnamurti, or his master, is saying, try to study that which will make you more helpful to others. And helpful in a very deep sense. Again, not that you may study, if you feel like, you may study social sciences so you can help people. But I think this goes even deeper and says, try to see in yourself what is it that is not or is producing suffering outside, or what is it that is a hindrance in your ability to help people, in whatever way we can help, not only by teaching or not only by helping at the physical level, in whatever situation we are in life. But this could be the center of our concern, in the sense that as you live as you learn about yourself, as you see your relationship with others, then you may discover what things you have to mature, what things you have to discover the right perspective, or what things you have to discover in yourself to be able to overcome reactions. You see what I mean? So the idea is that whatever we study, even if we are studying the secret doctrine, how are we approaching the secret doctrine? The secret doctrine is a very abstract book, if we may put it that way, that Blavatsky wrote about the evolution of the cosmos from a spiritual point of view. And so why are we studying the secret doctrine? Simply because we want to accumulate knowledge, or, as Blavatsky said, because by studying this, you are awakening, or if you do it in the right way, you may awaken a deeper perception. And that deeper perception will allow you to be a different kind of human being. So this kind of advice is showing the direction and the right motivation for our study, both of books or of ourselves. And probably we'll see, we have to be very honest. So we'll see, well, yes, I like when I can help people, but I'm really trying to learn because I want to get rid of this, of suffering, or because I want this or that. But if we go deep, if we recognize that, and we go deep, we may discover that, ultimately speaking, happiness will be attained through what we call helping people. In a very wide sense, again, saying helping people may look like too religious in the way of I'm helping here and there. What I'm saying is that if we are self-centered, that self-centeredness creates illusion and creates suffering. As we break through that self-centeredness, there is a state of harmony that begins to be born or to develop inside of us. So actually, even if we are looking for happiness, we may discover that the way to really attain a state of happiness is through doing through living unselfishly. So keep in mind that point of view, because since we are dealing with the yoga of theosophy, this is something that is basic in this approach to spirituality. So we said the study of books and the study of ourselves, and also we should incorporate the study of life itself, life and the situations that we live. In another important view in theosophy is this question of karma as a law that puts order in our lives. The idea is that everything that happens has a purpose, has an order. It's not merely something that is happening by chance. It's not something that we are being punished for something that we did. It's something that has a purpose of developing the right perspective. So this idea of karma is present in some religions, in some others is not. But the purpose, or one of the purposes for this idea, I think, is that we may have this attitude of paying attention to what happens in our lives, of trying to learn from what happens in our lives. Because if everything that happens has really a purpose, is part of an order, and is showing us what we still don't see, is showing us where we are still immersed in illusion. If this is true, then obviously it is important to pay attention to our life. So when we are going through a situation, instead of trying to run away from it or to blame somebody, it doesn't matter. It may be unjust from a personal point of view. Somebody may be doing something that we didn't produce in this personality, in this life. We may have produced it in a previous life or not, that is secondary. But the idea is that if it is happening right now, even if it seems unjust, there is something that we can profit from. And profit is not a right word, but the idea, because if we are reacting to something, that is showing us that there is something in ourselves that cannot see things from a deeper perspective. It is said that people who are really wise, they usually don't react to life. It's not that they don't have emotions, and we have all different kinds of enlightened beings. You have somebody like Ramana Maharshi, who seems to be very little engaged in the world and no reactions and always in a state of peace. Or you have a person like Nisargadatta Maharaj, who was more passionate and he would yell, or Krishnamurti, you see in his lectures that he's also very passionate. And so we shouldn't create an artificial model of what an enlightened being is. But the idea is that no matter what the external reaction, a sense of understanding produces a state of harmony and peace inwardly that is never affected, even if there are external reactions. So if there is a situation that is affecting us, we may use that situation to learn something from it. Of course, many things will affect us. Again, let us be honest and not think I'm a spiritual person, so I shouldn't be upset because somebody close to me died. Of course we are going to be sad because we are not going to have the presence of that person with us. Not that we think that after death that person may be in hell or that the person just disappeared. We may still really believe that the person is even in a better state of consciousness that this person was while on the physical plane, and still miss the presence of the person. So when I say that we have to see how we react to situations, I'm not saying we should condemn our reactions. Many of our reactions are natural, but if we can work on that, we may attain a state of maturity which is beyond the normal, in a sense. It's beyond the state that most of us are as human beings. And that will bring a sense of harmony, and from that harmony we can help others. Because we can really help others only when we ourselves are not caught in the same things. If we are still caught in the same things, it's not much what we can help. We can all help each other, but if we really can break through all these limitations, then there is a power that the person has to really help. So life itself is our great master. Life itself can become our best teacher, but we have to be interested in learning from life. And when we go through situations, let us try to learn how people act. Because sometimes we see things that we condemn in other people, but then we are doing the same. But since we are doing it, we have all kinds of justifications. So we can learn from other people what they are doing, and then think, how am I doing that? In some sense, maybe in a subtler way, we can see how being on the other side, on the receiving side of that kind of attitude feels, and think, am I doing this, and how am I making other people feel? And then let us learn about our reactions, why we react, and what is it that is really bothering you, or what your fears are, or what your points of sensitivity. So if we see our lives many times, we see ourselves once and again in certain situations. We see that we try to change external things, and then we fall again in a similar situation, in the same pattern, although the situation externally is different. That happens sometimes in some aspects of our lives. Because there is obviously something that we are repeating. There is obviously some attitude that we keep unchanged, and therefore is producing the same results. So immediately, that's a sign that we have to see inside and see this, try to learn about our patterns, about our reactions. So life and relationships are really, as Krishnamurti used to say, the mirror of ourselves. It is difficult to see ourselves in an abstract way, but through life we can see ourselves much better. Now this is possible as we develop a kind of impersonality. If we are too attached to our image of ourselves or to our emotions or our thinking, it's difficult to learn from life because we feel hurt. We feel hurt when we see something that we don't like. But if through study and through self-knowledge and through service and meditation, if through all these things we discover little by little that we are beyond the personality, that we are beyond our physical, emotional, and mental reactions, if we discover this, then there is like a space that is created between ourselves as this pure consciousness and the reactions that this pure consciousness is engaged in, usually in our daily life. So impersonality is really important in the ability to learn, and that's why I think the master was saying that we should have always this sense of what can help others, and the voice of the silence said that self-knowledge is the result of good actions, because we need to generate this impersonality. So this is more or less what I wanted to share with you about study as a whole discipline, a whole aspect of the spiritual life that embraces not only books, but also ourselves and life in general. So now we could share some comments and questions, and as we usually do.
It's interesting that you use the word impersonality, because it's not an often used term in English. I understand it, but I keep on thinking you're saying personality. And I would say detachment is more used, or, other terms. But the whole thing is about not being the person, no longer being, the charming person you were taught to be, which is coming from outside. It's letting who the real self is to come out.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's why I like that word, because we could use unselfishness also, but it has a different tone. It's the opposite to be personal about things, which doesn't mean that we should be aloof. It means impersonal in the sense of not being absolutely led by our personal feelings, likes and dislikes, reactions, but actually responding to what is out there. We rarely respond to what is out there. We respond to the reaction that what is out there produces in ourselves. So, for example, somebody is doing something. If what that person does produces a pleasant sensation, I will respond in a certain way. If it produces a unpleasant, I will respond in an opposite way. But what this person is doing may be good or bad, independently of what my reaction is. So if we are too personal about life, we are always acting according to our personal reaction and not according to what really happens, what really is really needed.
And by this,
Oh, can I just say one more thing? But the whole point is that we've all learned to be persons. You know, we all regard each other as persons. That's the big deal here on Earth. And what you learn when you are becoming more spiritual is not to be a person, to be the inner being.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, and that is fine. I mean, we need to learn to be persons before we can go beyond that. I mean, even from a metaphysical point of view, the reason why this sense of ego appears in consciousness is to develop a sense of I-ness, which during the evolution of the soul will purify to such an extent that that sense of I-ness will be identified with the whole. But first, it needs to be developed like anchored in a personal entity. So we couldn't, I don't think we would do any good if we raise a child without any sense of being a person. Probably it's impossible unless that person is already a really mature soul. So it's okay, that's part of what we are and what we need, but at a certain point our maturity should lead us to go beyond that. You know, growth is always about leaving behind stages and beginning a new stage. You have to stop being a kid, a child to be a teenager, and then you have to stop being a teenager to be an adult. If you keep acting as a teenager, then you have a psychological problem. So we need this person, but at a certain point we have to learn to let it go. In a mature way, it's not that we are denying the personality. The question is, what's the origin of our action? Is that pure perception that comes from our real self, or is the perception that is filtered by the reactions of our personality?
so the thoughts that are now forming for me are that we are a person now. We're a person now. From birth, we have grown and gone through many different stages, and I am a mature person now. However, in order for me to truly study myself, I need to, in a loving way, attempt to let go of my ego. Because if the ego is here, it's going to hold on to this person who has been formed, and I won't be able to study myself. So once the ego is gone, then you can find where to begin, how to look at yourself. Can you explain my thoughts?
Yes. If all these things are difficult to share and to think about. If we create a concept, a too rigid concept, I have to let go of my ego in order to learn, that may lead us also to not to the right action. In the sense that, how are you going to let go of your ego?
Exactly.
So, yes, if we can say at a conceptual level, generally speaking, we may say, yes, we have to let go of our ego, but the truth is more complex. So, our ego is a wrong perception of ourselves. So the real way, for example, in the Viveka Chudamani by Shankaracharya, which in English I think is the jewel, I don't know in English, the crown of wisdom, something like that. Crown jewel of discrimination. In that book, he says, when talking about detachment, he says, when there is right perception, when there is viveka, which is discrimination in a spiritual sense, detachment appears by itself. The attachments fall by themselves because they were there in the right place, in the first place, because we were not having the right perception. So when you have the right perception about something, then that right perception puts order in your consciousness, in relationship with whatever you are dealing with. So it is not that we have to try to let go of our ego through a very conscious will effort, which sometimes we need to. You know, if we have a reaction that we know that is not correct and that will damage somebody, and we have that reaction there, and if we cannot really perceive the root of the reaction, sometimes we cannot do much more than just hold it, you know. So that is part that sometimes we may do, but it's not the way we should work as a, you know, usually. So at the very moment where we perceive our ego interfering with the action, we are letting go of the ego. Because when we are seeing, that very seeing begins to produce a change. Sometimes we have to see several times something because our pattern of reaction was created by, you know, a lot of repetition. So sometimes it needs several insights, let's say. But I would say, to begin with, that as we perceive the reaction of our ego, we are at that moment letting go of the ego. So whenever you are, the problem with giving rules and saying, for example, we have to let go of the ego, is that we may fall into the temptation of trying to artificially produce that state. Or to say, to create a concept and to say, yeah, we shouldn't react with our ego, and still we react with our ego, but since we have that concept, it's hard to recognize it. We don't want to see that we are. If we really believe in the concept, then we don't want to recognize that we are acting with our ego. So we have to be very flexible in this and try to work always being honest. This is the idea. The ideal is to be able to act beyond the reactions of my ego. But I have to deal with whatever is here now. And in dealing with that, the result will come by itself.
Maybe instead of looking at them as negative, I must let go, can we just accept that they are tools for growth? And as we accept these tools for growth, then they automatically, they're there for us to learn and then to let go of.
Yeah. Yes, every idea has a danger intrinsic in the idea, because we may use that as an excuse also, to say, well, after all, my emotions are a tool for myself. I don't have to repress them, and so I will just act on the emotion. You know, sometimes it may become an excuse not to change something in ourselves. But if we understand this in the right way, as you are saying, I think it's a useful view. You know, the idea is that this ego, there is a saying that says the ego is a very good servant but an awful master. So is our ego the master in ourselves or the servant, in a sense, to put it in some metaphorical way. So spirituality is very subtle, but if we understand, if we see the subtlety, if we see that words are limited and we understand the spirit of what is trying to be transmitted in a book or in a talk, then it's easier to follow the right way, our right way.
So it sounds like ourselves, in addition to books and life, are tools really there for us to use as we bring awareness to each moment more and more, and then consciously taking action based on what we think we see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, and let us use any idea that is good for the time being, because from an ultimate point of view, no idea is really correct. But we as long as we are living in the illusion, then we need ideas. We need the right ideas. If we have the wrong ideas, it will be more difficult, probably not impossible, but more difficult to perceive the truth. So let us use ideas as hypotheses that are useful at this point, because also it depends on how we are. So that's why our self-knowledge is so important. Some people have more a laid-back tendency. They feel, more not very keen to follow a discipline. So they need a worldview that pushes them to do something. Some other people are already very active, and they need to slow down. So they will need a worldview that makes them be more relaxed. So you have to know yourself. What is your tendency? Is your tendency to overwork so that you will take the spiritual life and overdo it and strain yourself? Then try to understand the world from a perspective that says, everything is already perfect. The problem is that you keep messing things up. So let go and watch. But if that view may produce the opposite in you and may make you lazy, then you don't need that worldview. You need a different worldview. So it is important to know ourselves and see what we need to have a balanced attitude. So it's important not to stick to ideas as absolute truth. They are tools also.
Where does the idea of the witness come in here? Self-remembering also, Gurdjieff self-remembering, but the witness and then going beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we will deal with that more specifically in our next talk about meditation. But the witness is what I was referring by pure consciousness. This pure consciousness that is this pure perception that is not entangled with the personal reactions. So the becoming aware of that aspect of ourselves is what produces that space that I was talking about, between our pure consciousness or that state of witnessing and the personality. And it is necessary to discover that the witness in ourselves, to be able to act from there or to let actions come from there. So this is something that is essentially in the process of self-knowledge. But again, it's not so easy. For example, I read some time ago a Swami. This idea of the witness is in most traditions, but in particular in Vedanta, that is part of Hinduism. And I read a Swami that was talking about meditation as this attitude of witnessing what happens inside. And he said, if this kind of meditation is attempted by a mind that is not mature, that mind will probably become tamasic. Tamas, T-A-M-A-S, means like inertia. So he said, if the mind of the person is not balanced and mature, this practice of witnessing may generate a kind of inactivity, an attitude of passive attitude. And as it happened in India a lot of times, if you see the Hindus, many of them, especially in the past, because now they are more westernized, but they were very, very passive about life. So he said to be able to do this meditation in a sattvic way. Sattva is another different characteristic that means balance. To do it in a sattvic way, you need to work on yourself. So there is nothing that a person could say, just do this, and this is the magic formula to spirituality. Spirituality is really something that involves the whole of our being. And according to the phase of development we are in, it's the kind of practice that we will need. And that nobody can tell us that. We have to discover it. And we can discover it. All of us are so much in touch with what we are, because we are that we can discover what we need. But we have to start paying attention. If we never look inside, if we never try to learn about ourselves, then of course we need somebody else to tell us something, what to do. But it's not likely that that person will be able to.